right. Okay, I think we're good to go. So I think good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you're coming in from. It's a pleasure to be here today to actually do some sharing with you. My name is Felix. I'm basically part of the Google for Education team. Currently, I'm actually heading up the Gemini adoption for higher education across the Southeast Asia region, Hong Kong and Taiwan as well. Today's going to be an interesting time. I'm going to run through with you some of this agenda items as well, but most of the focus is really more along Workspace Studio. I'm pretty sure some of you may or may not have seen it before. So today's a good opportunity for you to actually see it in action and live as well when I'm going through some of the demos as well. But during this whole session, please feel free to ask any questions also, right? There's a comment segment that you can essentially put your questions on. Once I have time, I'll have a look out, and if there's any interesting questions that I feel could be beneficial for some of the other audiences as well, I will let you. I will actually call out your questions, and I'll try to answer them, or even do a live demonstration as well. Right. So let's get going. Let's kick start. Right. So let's talk about Google Workspace Studio. I think this is really, I would say, a game changer. It's something that, especially in this time of AI itself, having a tool that's powered with AI to actually streamline our work processes is really something going to be beneficial, especially when we look at AI being more towards a productivity and collaboration tool as well. But if you look at the entire ecosystem of Google tools, it's not just Workspace Studio itself. Where you can actually find them is essentially sitting across your entire stack of Google Workspace. Right, so when you start with Google Workspace, you get all the different tools like your docs, your slides, and your sheets. Right. Subsequently, you also get all the additional features, especially for education customers and users as well. You actually get the classroom management tool that you can start to utilize. Aside from that, I think this is where, when it comes to the AI features itself, you actually start to see a lot more different components you can start to utilize. One of which is, of course, Workspace Studio. I believe most of you would be very familiar with Gemini as well. So today's focus will be on this component itself. Now, the main difference of it, if we look at the AI components, is first and foremost Gemini for Education. I think for those of you who are really very familiar with it, or you're starting to use it already, Gemini for Education is basically Gemini sitting directly into your Google Workspace tools. So of which, if you think about it, your docs, slides, and sheets, you will see a side panel on the right-hand side of your screen where Gemini is embedded within the tool itself, and you can ask any questions. Then we have Notebook LM, which is one of the most fantastic tools ever. So if you're talking about a teaching and learning perspective itself, a lot of times when I look at how students are using it, they are using it very effectively for reinforcement learning. And for teachers also, they are actually focused on using Notebook LM to create most of the in terms of like digital content and so on. And the last but not least is also looking at Workspace Studio, where we are actually focused more towards how we can automate some of these workflows directly, right? So what's also very important is the security piece. Components as well. It's also really looking at the security area itself in terms of what's being covered. So when you're talking about using any AI tools, right, it's also more focused towards this direction. Sorry, just give me a minute. I noticed something here. Okay. I hope this is working now. All right. Okay. There we go. So what I was sharing earlier on is really more towards the enterprise-grade security itself. So basically coming out from here, I think a lot of users are always very concerned when it comes to the security piece. So when it comes to Google Workspace, Gemini, and so on, you can actually focus on use the tools more effectively without having to worry about like some of the security concerns as well. So these are just some of the listed certifications that we have acquired. So basically, you can actually use the tools more effectively. Now let's spend a little bit more time to talk about Google Workspace Studio. I think in general, it's a fantastic tool. I use it personally for some of my email respondents as well. especially when it comes to like specific tasks. Now, if you think about it, when it comes to a typical workflow itself, especially when you're teaching, if you're managing multiple classes, your students are going to ask you multiple questions as well. So these are things that you potentially have to answer more like a repetitive kind of motion, right? So instead of doing that, we can actually set up what we call a flow in such a way that when you are receiving such emails as well, you can actually automate it so that you actually get a response automatically directly from there. So if you look at this perspective itself, you have two options. One of which is, of course, you can use Gemini as a whole to create, meaning you can put in a simple prompt, right? Just ask it to create a flow towards a different action itself. I think that's one way that you can do it. The other one is really more focused in terms of custom steps where you can actually come up with different steps and flows and processes that you actually want it to do. So this will actually help you a lot when it comes to customizing it. Later on, I'll run through with you in terms of what are some of the other functions you can do. So once you do this combination itself, you actually create that automated flow within your entire Google Workspace ecosystem. But if you really have no idea what's going on in terms of like, where should I start? What should I do? The great thing about Workspace Studio is that it gives you a couple of interesting templates, right? So you can actually do simple things like, for example, getting a daily summary of unread emails. Like some of us, like especially for myself, every day when I wake up, it's like another additional 40, 50 emails coming to our inbox. So how do I actually get a summary so that I know which are the emails that I can focus on as well? There are interesting ones like, let's say, for example, like auto add email attachments to Drive. Sometimes we could have important documentations that are in that specific email itself. How do we automate it and save that documentation into Google Drive? So there's a lot of such templates within Workspace Studio that you can actually start to utilize. So if there are cases whereby you are not sure where to start, you can always look at this perspective and start with a template. Subsequently, you can always customize the template directly from here. So let's think about it. It's a new way of automation. If we look at how we used to do all these documentation flows in terms of how we respond to emails or how we actually process, let's say, maybe a Google Forms, and when the data starts to populate within a Google Sheet, how do we manage the data and so on? It's kind of a manual process. It takes a lot of time, especially in the teaching and learning space. As educators itself, you won't have a lot of time to actually manage some of these components. So if you had an agent to actually do all this automation for you, right? Basically built on Gemini itself, it reasons, it plans, it understands the flow, it provides its recommendation as well to really let you know in terms of whether the flow works or not, and also looks through your emails and the different components that you're attaching to it. It's simple to use. You don't need to be a coder, right? Later on, when we run through the demonstration, you will notice that it's actually quite straightforward. Like I mentioned earlier, you can actually do a Gemini prompt directly, or you can do a drag and drop to fill up the steps that you're trying to create as well. Last but not least, is really very integrated. Now, some of you will be thinking, what's so interesting about this? Because yes, it seems like I can read my emails and stuff. When you start to see the different functionalities within it, like what are the different tools that are being integrated, I think you will start to appreciate like how you can actually create different types of flows for different workflows that you're actually trying to do within your institution itself. But I think what's very important, and this is something that I also preach a lot when I do presentations, it's always the human in the loop, or I would use this term called HMH, right? The human mechanism where you come in, you use an AI tool. That's where you have the machine to actually do it for you and generate whatever prompts that you actually put it into. The final output is where the human comes in to intervene, where you have to actually evaluate the final output. So this is very important, not just for Workspace Studio, but across all the different Gemini tools that Google offers to you, right? So when you use any of these tools, always remember this framework. Don't give it 100% trust, right? Always look at the potential of reviewing your contents and making sure that it makes sense to you before you actually publish out the content or the application or even the workflow itself, and start to utilize it, right? So this is very crucial. Now, how do we start? So if we look at the flow of how we actually set up an automation workflow. So the very first point you need to do is really choose a starting point. The starting point itself comes with a couple of different ready-made integrations. So you can see from here, you've got your calendar, you've got Gmail, you've got your chats, right? You got your Google Sheets, you got your Drive as well, and you got your form responses. So what can happen is, say, for example, you could receive an email first. I can say when I get an email, and then this will start the entire flow in terms of what the action items are. Subsequently, when I do receive an email, for example, I can then choose the next step, right? In this instance, you can see I can actually ask Gemini to say, can you actually help me to create a certain flow? Or if I want to create a certain workload that potentially can help me in my emails or documents and stuff like that as well, I can actually ask Gemini to do it directly. There are also AI skills and tools that you can actually start to use, right? So in certain cases, say for example, if you receive an email, but you only want to focus on those that have an attachment, right? You can also click on extract, or you can choose decide in terms of how you want the workflow to be. Okay, and then in your Gmail itself, so once you already received that email, you can then decide to tell Gemini or Workspace Studio to say that, you know what, maybe notify me by email, or could you draft an email response based on the question that is done from there? And can I actually link it to a specific knowledge base that I have in my Google Drive? Or can I actually use contents that I've ingested into, say, for example, like GEMS as well? So under the Gmail structure itself, you get a couple of options. So you can actually set that as a next step or an action item after you already configured your starter email. Right? The email responder, for example, you can see over here. So say, for example, when I get an email as the starting point, my step 2 is basically add a label. That means I want to mark the email itself. It could be a travel itinerary, or it could be a question from a student, or it potentially can be a question maybe from your leadership team as well. Then subsequently, I'll label this. After I label it, make sure we check the step that make sure every email is being labeled. Then ask Gemini and say that, based on the question here, can I then draft a reply for my end user itself? So you can see by setting this up immediately, let's say, for example, I know that every management call, I need the user to really focus on this, right? I need the flow to actually focus on this and really work towards that specific email. I can set up something like this to really respond. Teachers, for example, one very fantastic use case is parental emails, right? So sometimes you do get emails from parents. You could actually work on those aspects as well. And not forgetting all the entire ecosystem of different tools as also. If you look at this, you also get options to interact with chats. You get options to interact with Google Sheets, for example. You can add a row, update rows, clear rows, and so on. But also you can interact together with your Google Drive, right? So the earlier example when I shared with you, how can I actually pull an email and save it to Drive, right? This is one way that you can actually do it as well. So all of this that you're actually seeing is actually pre-configured. So in such a way that all you need to do is just select the right flow, select the right action item that you want to do, and there you go, you actually get a very simple step. Okay. So one very good example over here, another one is really more towards exam feedback. I believe educators also do this a lot. In terms of when you have a class of 40, you do an examination, and then subsequently, you get a results from, let's say, for example, Google Forms, right? What you want to do is basically get a feedback processing done. Typically, what teachers would do is to go through every different results and exam papers by the students, and then subsequently they'll provide a feedback to the student based on their results and how they perform, and evaluating the thought process of the students as well. But in this case, what we can do is to get Gemini to do that evaluation. Now, what then happens is that the feedback will be provided in a Google Docs document. So this is where, as educators itself, we come in here to actually evaluate to see whether the responses from Gemini actually make sense. So you really need to have that intervention and make sure that you are looking through all these different details as well. Okay, even for Google Docs and tasks also, I think this is also one of the crucial part, because we're going to use a lot of document writing. We need to add it to a specific documentation, for example, that's existing. It could be a shared document across the teacher community within your school, or it could also be a document that's shared across to your students, right? So there's all these different tasks that you can actually do. And you can actually use the task function to create a task to say, this is an action item for a specific user as well. Right? So in general, the templates itself are all located here. So later on, as we go along, you will start to see when I do the demonstration itself, how we can actually utilize some of these components, right? It's very easy to use. I can guarantee you, I wouldn't even say it's a low-code, no-code platform. I would really say this is really a no-code platform where you can just go inside there and start to utilize directly, right? So when we look at integrating different platforms, the question then comes, because the Google ecosystem, especially when it comes to Google Workspace in my initial slide, it's quite a broad spectrum of different tools, right? So tools like Notebook.LM, when you start to utilize them, how can we actually bring this into Workspace Studio? So just imagine a simple use case, right, where I create a notebook. Let's say, for example, it could be the history of arts, or it could be talking about geography, or computing science and so on as well. And when I get an email question from my student, right, I can then think about this flow to say, instead of me answering that question, can I get Notebook.LM to generate a response? In this instance, you can see summarized answers to the question from the customer or the user, right? The customer message refer to the very first step, which is the initial email. So based on this, it will act like a prompt to Notebook.LM, and then subsequently it will generate a response, and then we'll draft a reply directly from here, right? So when it comes to any Gemini powered functions as well, I think of it this way, right? When it comes to AI agent, you can always ask Gemini to create it for you. Otherwise, you can always leverage on Gemini gems, right, to actually do it as well. So you can actually find gems directly in gemini.google.com, right? So you can actually create it directly. Otherwise, there's also a component called AI skills. So essentially what it will do is that, say, for example, if I have unread emails, I want AI to actually read the emails for me, or get Gemini to actually decide to see whether is that flow correct, or is it right to actually assume that I'll get emails and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different components that you can play with, and different actions that you can combine to create that perfect flow for you, right? So ask Gemini. I don't have to cover this, but I think pretty much everyone has used Gemini before. So instead of using that specific action itself, we can use Gemini to just ask it to create for me that flow, right? So it's free form, just do a prompt, and then subsequently you can always edit that item as well, right? Extract is all here. This is where you can actually decide to say, do you want to extract certain information, and then subsequently put it within a documentation also. Okay, decide, really checking if that step is completed. If it's not completed, can I get you to go back to that next flow? Right, and then of course Gemini gems. For those who haven't tried this before, you should. I think this is wonderful. So sometimes when I do lessons for my kids as well, what I essentially do is to actually use Gemini gems to create subject matter experts in different topics. So say, for example, if they're in primary school or in secondary school, I can actually take some of these topics and create multiple gems. So of which I can use these gems to give it to my kids, for them to actually learn on subject-specific matters, right? So you'll be very streamlined in terms of like the knowledge base itself. So if it's a math textbook, they won't actually bypass into like different languages as well, right? So you can actually do Gemini gems directly in your Gemini console. Okay, so there's a lot of different functions that you can do, especially when it comes to gems also, right? Same thing, there's a lot of templatized templates that Google actually created. So you can actually come into gems and then start to use some of these templates, and then iterate from there directly, right? So just showing you a simple example, right? A lot of us really, when we wake up, have a cup of coffee, especially for teachers, we don't have time to run through all of our emails. But what we would like to do is basically to see, if I imagine myself having 40 to 50 emails a day, what's really very important is to have that flow to say that now, run through all my unread emails, process all the emails, and give me a summary, right? Or I can also mention to Gemini, categorize for me in terms of which are the more important ones that have action items or next steps that are tagged to my name as well. So basically, when that happens, what then this flow will actually do is that they will send you a Google chat, right? So you see a message early in the morning. Let's say I set a time at 8 o'clock, for example. When I start my computer, I get to see a chat message to say, these are the emails that you have missed, right? But these are the important ones that you need to follow up as well, right? So it really gives me that accessibility to say that now I don't have to run through all my emails. Of course, I'm not suggesting you skip any of the emails, but I think the whole idea is really just to focus on the ones that you really need to get back as soon as possible, then subsequently running through the rest of the emails as well. All right, same thing for action items. So based on the meeting notes, when I conducted a meeting, subsequently it could be, let's say maybe if I miss any meetings as well, and then I receive the notes, I can also do a summary using Workspace Studio, where I can actually put in the calendar based on the meeting and all the different meeting notes as well, extract out the right information for me, and then I can start to create a task to say, create a task in my calendar that I need to do certain action items also. In terms of operation, when it comes to approval, I think we get that a lot, right? Especially in education, sometimes you might create a flow for your students to actually follow. So in this instance itself, so let's say, for example, if we get a form coming up from here, what will then happen is that the action item is to ask Gemini, can you also decide for me whether the request makes sense? And if this is true, then you start to send a message in chat directly as well. So you can see all these different flows really have different perspective of things. But I thought to make it more relevant to the audience here today, we'll try to swing it towards a more education context. So I'll show you some of these demonstrations and you can follow along if you want to, right? The very first one, I think it's quite common here. So one of the key things is that, you get a lot of questions from students. So sometimes you are coming up with a new excursion trip, for example, or it could be a new program that the school is launching for students. And as a teacher itself, you're probably going to get a lot of different questions when it comes to like the specific program itself. What are the details? How do I get myself on board? It could be a financial program also, right? So these are some of the things that you can do. First and foremost, you can always use a Gemini Gem to set up a knowledge base. So say, for example, in this instance, I'm looking at students who potentially are keen to join a university in Singapore, but they're not too sure what are some of the programs available. So what I've done is to actually create a Gemini Gems directly in Gemini, and then subsequently I'll start the flow. So I won't run through the details of how you can set up a Gemini Gem, but I'll show you how you can actually configure that directly in Workspace Studio. So let me switch screens to my Workspace Studio. All right. So you can see over here, this is the interface, right? The URL is studio.workspace.google.com. You can actually go inside there and you should be able to access it once you log into your account. What then happens is that the interface itself, oops, let me go back, give me a minute, okay? The interface itself, you can see over here, I can actually put a prompt if I want to, just to get Gemini to quickly create a flow for me. Otherwise, what I can do is I can always scroll down. You can see that there's a lot of different templates that are already created. So say, for example, if I want to focus on tasks and action items, I can filter it by that. And then subsequently, it'll give me some of these templates that are already pre-created as well. So what I would like to do is, instead of me creating directly through Gemini, I already have a thought process in terms of what I'm trying to do. So what I've done is to actually create a flow beforehand, okay? Something around this space that you can see here. So when I get an email, right? So my flow is very simple. When I get an email here, what I've done is to tell Gemini Workspace Studio to actually focus on that specific email. Now, the important part about this is that, of course, if you know the sender itself, if you know that, let's say, for example, it's from one of my team members, I have the whole list of all my team, I can put them up here. But otherwise, if it's more generic, let's say coming from a student population, or it could be future students coming into the university itself, I will just put in some of the keywords like inquiries, question, understanding the university, some common words that might be detected. And you can, of course, use Gemini to actually do this as well. What I could suggest is use your Gmail and then turn on Gemini and then ask it a question. Can you tell me some of the common words, right, that are available in emails that are with regards to like inquiries about universities in Singapore? So Gemini will do some recommendation, but because of demo purposes, I actually name my email based on this. So it makes it easier for me to find, and I can show you how it looks like as well. Subsequently, what I did is to actually add a step. So I've already created a Gemini Gems. So for those who haven't seen Gems before, right, maybe what I can show you is under gemini.google.com, you can see over here, this is your Gems. And then from here, I already created a Gems that's focused on my Singapore University course recommendation itself, right? So what I'm doing now is I'm using Workspace Studio here to now go back into the Gems and start to pull out certain information. So you can see over here, I can try to find the Gems that I've created. In this case, if I choose like career guidance, and then based on the inquiry, I can extract and generate a response draft. Now, you will notice this button over here called variables. This is very important. So when you're creating, let's say that response itself, you can actually decide what are some of the details that you would like to put up. Because my first step is on this email itself, what I can do is I can actually say, okay, based on this, I can say, hi, so-and-so. So I will need, let's say, for example, the full name's sender email address. Or I can just take the full name or sender display name as well. So I can do this and then drag it across and then put a message there to say that you might want to explore something else. And I can, of course, put out all these different categories as well. So this is just an example, but of course you can amend it accordingly as well if it makes sense for you. All right, in this instance, I'm not going to use this sentence. Okay, I'm just going to keep it as it is. Then subsequently, what happens is that based on the question itself, I will then ask Workspace Studio to draft me an email. So in my flow over here, what I've done is to actually create a simple draft of which Workspace Studio will create for me. So I will then evaluate. If it makes sense, I will then click the send button. Now you have the options to say send it out automatically. But again, like I mentioned, always have that human intervention to just make sure you're on the right track, right? So the typical process of this is always name your flows, right? So you can see this is student inquiry responder. This is very important in case you start to create multiple flows. You don't want to lose track in terms of what each flow is actually doing as well. And the other important step is, of course, to do a test run, right? When you do a flow already, when you're done with it, always make sure you do a test run and you can actually start based on that as well. So I'm just going to click on test run and then see how it goes from here. So very quickly, what will happen is that Workspace Studio will start to do it, all right? In this case, it will say email receive. When I get an email receive, I'll say start. So say, for example, if I get an email from my email itself, right, I can say start from here. So from here, I can actually choose. So let's say I choose demo. What I'm doing here is basically just to test based on a specific item as well. So let's say, for example, if I have a demo meet invitation, right, I can start from here. And it will start to run the flow. So if, let's say, along the way, it notices that there's certain areas that might not be relevant or the flow itself is kind of broken, there will be a recommendation for you as well. It will actually mention to you that this flow doesn't make sense because you are missing certain information and so on. But for this instance, you can see it makes sense. Run completed, flow ran successfully. If everything is okay, then you start to click on the turn on button. That is how easy you do it. And the best thing about this is that you can actually say, share this as well. So if you feel that you want to share it across to your entire company, or if you feel that you want to open this flow to someone else and you feel that it's useful, impactful for everyone in your school, you can also do this also, right? So it's a very simple step. So you can see from here, it's all drag and drop, nothing complicated. I've included the steps in the deck as well. So if you're interested, you can also try it. I think this is one of the interesting ways that you can do it in school, creating a gems and then relating it back to a specific topic. The other one that I also was looking at is how can I create a teaching assistant to a specific subject and guiding my students to the right resource. So sometimes when the problem comes up is my educators are essentially coming out when it comes to multiple questions from students. And then at the same time, what then happens is that I will have to respond to individual students in terms of, this is your question, this is your answer. You might want to refer to this, and it's kind of a cumbersome process. But what if I can actually create a flow such that it actually responds to the student as well, right? So you can see over here, I created a simple notebook that's based on the history of arts. Then subsequently, I start to create the flow, go to Workspace Studio, I create a new flow, and then I define the trigger, which is when I get an email on a question on the topic that I'm teaching as well, right? Then subsequently, we can actually do this also. Define an action, ask Notebook LM, and perform a test run. So there's that flow that we can actually create. But before I go into the demonstration, I think there are some questions, right? I actually see questions that are talking about privacy concerns for personal information within emails, Drive documents. I think this is also very, very crucial because just for you to take note, when you have your account set up, a Google Workspace account set up within your school environment, within your school domain itself, just remember that the contents that you actually have within your Google Drive is not used for Gemini training and it's not accessed by Google, right? Pretty much the same concept if you think about it more towards the cloud computing ways, right? This is all fully controlled. It's tied to your own account. We do not access anything around that space. I believe my partner in crime in the scene has already answered that question also, right? So this is also very, very beneficial for you to know because a lot of times, like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about security, your contents and information is tied to your account. Google doesn't have access to it, right? And then at the same time, when Gemini is being introduced, we don't use your contents for training. So just take note of that as well, okay? All right, so I'll jump back into the demonstration. Okay, so for this instance, just to reiterate the use case, it's really very focused towards guiding the students to the right resource. So what I've done is I've created a notebook from here. Okay, let me just start up my notebook. You can see over here, this is my notebook. So I've already created a notebook that's very focused on the history of arts. I have a website, and then at the same time, I have a PDF, which is like probably 370 over pages, right? So from here, I can actually create like multiple content sources as well. So instead of using Notebook LM or just sending the notebook directly to the students, what I have done is to actually created a flow of which is pulling out information directly from Notebook LM. So you can see over here, this is my flow, right? I've selected the starter. So let's say, for example, if I focus on all emails, if I get a question from my students, my next step is go to Notebook LM, tie it back to the history of arts because I'm an arts teacher. I know my students are all going to ask me questions on the arts itself. I will just enter a prompt, all right? Looking at this email, help me respond to this question, right? So what I've done is to actually say my variable now is to really look at the email body itself, meaning the contents within the email from the sender. And then I will put this prompt directly into Notebook LM. So Notebook LM within the chat panel itself will actually give me a response, and they will then take this response, and subsequently I can drive that email to draft a reply directly from here, right? So once that draft comes in, I can choose in terms of the input directly, the response that is generated by Notebook LM, I can choose the input to be inserted into that email, and then subsequently respond it back to the students. I can also say, maybe you might want to refer to this notebook that I've shared with the entire class, right? This is one way that you can actually make it more automated rather than having you to actually go through each and every single one of those emails, right? So it's kind of, again, the next steps, I don't want to repeat myself, sound like a broken trumpet, but essentially, important step, rename your workflow, and then at the same time also do a test run as well, right? So these are just two simple flows that I wanted to cover. I think one last one that I wanted to share, I was actually playing around with all the different possibilities or all the different right formulas that you can actually play with, right? One of the key things that I was also looking at is more like feedback forms. This is something that we do a lot, not just with our students, but sometimes we also do it with parents or even with our peers within the university or the school itself. So what really happens is that you're probably going to create multiple different forms, right? That you can actually start to gather different data sets. It could be about the way of how you're teaching, or it could also be related to the way, let's say, for example, understanding the school environments and stuff like that as well. But once you get all this different data, the question then next is, what do you do with it, right? Aside from providing insights, what else can you do from here? So what I've actually thought about is, instead of doing the standard, responses directly into Google Sheets, what I've done is to actually create an additional flow to say that now I want you to get the sheet contents based on that specific column. And then I want you to update a specific row to actually provide me a summary in terms of, say, for example, how many parents said agreed that the students are actually going for the excursion, or how many parents said no. So I'll just get a summary in terms of the number, and then subsequently I can just say notify me in chat. In this way itself, I can get a very quick summary itself to really look at the exact numbers so I can do my reporting directly. All right, I'll just pause here again. I think I got two interesting questions. Let me see. Do you have best practices that compare workflows through AppScript versus Studio? That's a very interesting question. Now, I look at it from a persona perspective. If I'm a technical person, then I understand a little bit of coding, I can use AppScript. I think that's fine, right? I can actually use the flow, use AppScript to create that flow as well. I think that's totally fine. But if I'm a teacher who comes in without any technical knowledge and don't really know how to do like codings and development, typically what I'll do is I'll just use Workspace Studio as it is. So as you can see over here, say for example, if I were to start a very simple flow, right? So I'll start a simple flow here. You can see that instead of me learning how to do programming, I can just do a click, drag and drop. So say for example, over here, when I get a chat message, for example, right? Then subsequently I'll say conversation type. Okay. And then from here, I can then say, specific names, or I want to get a direct message as well. Then subsequently, I can just add a step without having to do programming. Just click on next step. I can then say whether I want to choose Ask Gemini, or whether I should do a deep research or extract and so on and so forth. So from a persona perspective, I feel that will be the use case. So if you're very quite used to like AppScript and stuff, I think you can always do that directly in AppScript. You can also start to integrate that. I think there's a workflow that you can actually integrate AppScript into Workspace Studio, right? So I hope that answers the question. It's done through Workspace in Google Sheet. I think there's a follow-up question to this in terms of replacing workflows done with AppScript. I haven't tried that personally, but I feel that there could be some resources online potentially that could guide you to do that, right? But definitely do a Gemini search or even a Google search itself, right? Just to find that kind of right resources that potentially you can try to do. But that definitely a very interesting use case. I might try it after this session as well, right? So just to iterate again, I think this was my use case. I'll go back into the demonstration and then I'll take any questions that come along, right? So how do we collect information directly from Google Forms? So over here, you can see this is my workflow here. I've created something for student feedback. So my starting point is when a form response comes in. I created a demo form directly from here, right? And then subsequently, what then happens is that you can see over here under the action items itself, okay, get the sheet content. So basically, I know already have a Google Sheets that actually pulling out all this information. So I'm pulling out directly from the sheet itself. So you can actually select which document that you actually want to focus on. Subsequently, you can say form respond one, which is the based on the tab name itself. So if you have a Google Sheets with multiple tabs, you can actually see the tabs appearing directly from here. So you can select from there. What then happens is that I tell Google Sheets to say, or Workspace Studio to say, I want you to focus on this spreadsheet under user edit, under form 1. Can you actually focus on the country of citizenship? Because my focus as an educator doing this survey is now understanding what's my country dynamics when it comes to like the kind of questions that I'm receiving as well. So from here, I can actually set the variable. So in this instance, I can say get sheet contents. And then from here, I can choose any of the rows or columns within the Google Sheets itself. Right, so you can see it's quite seamless in such a way that it's able to pull out all this different information based on the document you've selected. Right, so it makes it easier for you to actually very quickly set up a flow. Last but not least, I also say notify me in chat. So immediately what will happen is that it will send a prompt to say that, hey, there's a new entry and the numbers on the full country actually listed down here directly from here. Right, so it makes it very easy to do. So you can see, for me, it's just really spending time when I was creating all these different workflows. It was really just spending time to think about whether this workflow makes sense for me and what's the impact of it. Right, when you create a workflow itself, it's not something that you just create for the fun of it, but really more towards how can it actually impact you on your daily work life as well. Okay, so I hope this is good. So these are just some of the demonstrations I wanted to show. So what we'll do now is really leave it for question and answers. So if you have any questions that you want to ask based on the demonstration or based on the product itself, feel free to just put it in the comments and feel free to ask your questions away and I'll try to answer. If there's a need to, I can do a live demonstration to actually show you or try to answer your question as well. So just a quick round of check. Any questions from the audience? Let me see. All right, I think more feedback itself. All right, feel free to ask any questions, even if you want to check in on different tool sets like across the Google Workspace suite. Feel free to do so. All right, or if you have some complex thought process in terms of like different tools that you want to use from Google, feel free to do it. But yeah, happy to answer any questions on Workspace Studio as well. Let me see whether there's any questions. Maybe in another 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, I don't think I'm getting any questions, but no worries. Feel free to just keep pinging along the way if any of the questions actually come to your mind, right? But before I actually close off the session, I thought it would be interesting. After hearing from me, there's going to be a few more sessions that's going to be very interesting as well when it comes to education and how you can use some of these different tools. So we have 2 more sessions upcoming, one on the 21st of July, talking about the implementation of AI at scale, right? So my colleague Sime will be sharing this. And then subsequently, we also have another session in August 11th, right, talking about elevating student onboarding and engagement with AI. So my colleague Swan will be sharing together with one of the educators from the National Teachers College as well, just to hear from them in terms of what's happening. Right, so there's a lot of the different things that we are doing. So as the sessions go along, you will start to notice that whatever you're learning actually creates a nice little flow for you that you can actually start to apply within your institution itself. All right. So with that, what we'll do is we'll close off the session. But I think what's very important is yeah, I'll be really thankful if you can actually fill up this feedback form. I really would like to hear from you in terms of whether you found this session interesting or whether you learned something new as well. So please feel free to scan the QR code and then fill up a feedback form as well. Sorry, I think one question came in while you're filling up the feedback form. I think this could be an interesting question. Can the output of Studio Flow be saved in Markdown? Can the output of Studio Flow be saved in Markdown? Could I get more clarity in terms of like the Markdown itself? Which process are you referring to? All right, to who has asked that question. Can the output of Studio Flow be saved in Markdown? Steve, Gail, I think you asked that question, right? Probably just a little bit more details on that aspect. Okay, so you're looking more towards a Markdown file. Okay, got it. Right. Studio Flows are basically, I would say, more native structure. So basically, you can't do that as well. It's basically saved directly into your flow within the Workspace Studio directly, right? So you're not able to actually port it out into a Markdown file. For another question from Anna, for the form starter, is it just one-on-one? I believe not, right? Let me, okay, I think everyone is still looking at that. Let me just try it. So if you look at the starter flow, all right, and if you look at a form, I would love to switch my screen, but I think in general, I think when you select the form itself, it is not just one-on-one. Okay, when you say one-on-one, it could be referring to a single form itself. Then yes, it's only tied to a single form. You can't link to multiple forms directly from here, right? So Anna, I hope that answered your question. Okay. Any other questions, feel free to send. Once I see it on the screen, I'll try to answer that as well. But in the meantime, I think the feedback is there. Steve's question above. Steve asked the question, can the flow be processed? Yep. So Steve, I think to your question, so basically it's tied towards a flow that is being stored directly into your Workspace Studio account. I don't see the ability for you to actually port it out as a Markdown file. So typically you have to work directly in the Workspace Studio setup itself. All right. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, I think sounds good. So again, thank you very much for taking time to listen in to this session. I hope you learned something new. Give it a shot. I think the very first time it might seem a little bit intimidating when it comes to the website, but honestly, when you get into it, and like what I always tell teachers when I do my workshops as well, the more hands-on you do, you actually get more familiar with the tool, and then you can actually start to create a lot of wonderful projects or workflows that will be beneficial for you and other educators as well. All right. So with that, I think thank you very much once again. And I think that's the end of the session for me. So hope you guys enjoyed the session and hope to see you around for the next few sessions.